بحر بحر
בסדר. טוב.
It only occurs to me occasionally, because today is like most mornings in my house. I wake up, read my paper, have my breakfast with my family, like other families in other cities. But it is not. I do not feel separated from those I read about, who live in another country or another place. But once in a while, something you see or feel reminds you. The city will not let you forget. To start the morning in Jerusalem is not like starting the day in any other city in the world. Things happened here that for millions was the beginning and the sum of everything. While a few meters away lies the remains of other aspirations, the calling card of 41 conquerors, and the architectural layers of a dozen civilizations. Jerusalem has always had two lovers, those who have her and those who yearn for her.
We will work with each other, we will work side by side, and we'll guard each man's dignity and save each man's pride. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love.
For Kashur, the land is very precious. And things that grow on this land are very precious. For him, a tree is more than what you see. It's more like a human being. The children my children play with live 7 meters away, across our street. My children do not refer to them as Arabs, but as children who speak Arabic. Kashur feels a part of the city, that he owns part of it. He feels that somehow Jerusalem is the center of his people's life.
يلا باي 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 طيب يلا بدنا نجيب الباص واجي ايوه يلا يلا
بصي مشان اجيبك بصي
Before 1967, this was a cabbage field. After 1967, many came from abroad to work here. It was to become the most ambitious archaeological dig in Jerusalem's history. The purpose was to find some remnants of the temple, pieces that had been discarded by the Romans when they burned and destroyed it, forcing the Jews into exile. I have recently completed writing a book on Jerusalem. In my research, I became increasingly aware of one thing. The problems of today may seem very important, but not so important when you look back 4,000 years.
For the Muslim, this is the third in line for important holy places in the world. After Mecca, Medina comes Jerusalem. For the Jews, the religious Jews, this is the place. Christians feel Jerusalem to be the heart of their faith. I think it is important, however, to leave the religious side of things for a moment and to think of the political side of things. Only really one time has there been an extremely strong central government controlled from Jerusalem. Can you name it? Who was it? Who was the leader of Jerusalem? It's so easy, it's hard. David and Solomon. So only under Jewish governments has Jerusalem ever become a capital. Otherwise, it was controlled by Cairo, it was controlled by Damascus, it was controlled by Istanbul, it was controlled by Mesopotamia, by many other countries.
In the Triple Bazaar, the pointed arches left by the Crusaders look down on a scene which has changed little in 800 years. The Crusaders have left their mark on walls dating back to the 12th century. A bazaar is like a club. It is not just a place to go shopping. It is a place to talk, to communicate, an atmosphere of human proportions, where the problems of the world can often be penetrated by the look in a man's eyes. I'm a product of the new city. Most of my life was separated from the old. I remember having thought, over there is the enemy. Suddenly we became citizens of the same place, face to face. We were sure that the moment the population mixed, there'd be terrible problems. But then it happened, and we were all human beings, all of a sudden.
Now, the church itself is the third church on the site. There was the first church was built here in the 4th century in the Byzantine days. That was destroyed by the Persians in the 7th century. Now, these trees, 8 of them, are very, very ancient. Some could have been here at the time of our Lord's agony. If not, they are offshoots off the original trees. They still bear their olives, and they're still very fruitful. You can see, if you look here, if you can see the green olives on the trees. They won't be ripe until about the end of the month. Now, mind the step here as you come along.
In the last 8 years, there has been a substantial increase in the number of new citizens. The Jewish population has risen from 200 to 250,000. The Arabs from 60 to 90,000.
ومش هناك في الجنين الجديدة اللي بتلعبوا فيها؟ بتروحوا في المنتزه؟ شاطرين.
The east side of Jerusalem had been systematically neglected by the Jordanians. Amman was the capital of Jordan, and the Jordanians were afraid that a prosperous Jerusalem would be at Amman's expense. So very little was done.
عربية تحت هذا لازم اسوي لك الشارع قريب المدينة وحياة شو الدين بدينا ما خلصت والقرآن حج روح اتفرج من شان الله.
Today, the citizen of Jerusalem, be he on the east or west side, demands more and better services because for the first time in his life, he knows what to expect. Jerusalem has problems that affect all big cities of the world. We are on the borderline of becoming a metropolis. Over 350,000 people. And though City Hall is the same building that housed the administration of the British Mandate, the problems of today are quite different.
You're all going to be walking around the old city. You're all going to hear all the kinds of things that these people tell you, all the kinds of things that these people tell you. And the way to sort out everybody and to put them in a spot is to say, okay, do you believe that it is right that a Jewish state exists here? And as well, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about what that Jewish state brought, and let's talk about refugees, let's talk about borders, let's talk about phantoms. Say, no, I want to ask a simple question. Is it right that a Jewish state exists here?
There are certain parts of it along here which we haven't really dug, but we have the level at this corner, we have the level there.
The time of the Second Temple was the most prolific and dazzling architectural period in Jerusalem's history.
But if we've got the Herodian just underneath it a little way in, it'd be worthwhile looking.
Yes. No,
Did we find anything we could say there was Roman here at all? You know,
The stone being uncovered today were witness to the great temple built by Herod, the life of Christ, and the burning of the city by the Romans in 70 AD.
Si ça continue vraiment, je peux dessus.
The British Army engineer Wilson began his dig over 100 years ago. Later, the French excavated the eastern side of the Temple Mount. So did the Russians, the Germans, a lot of people. The drawings of the find are still used as a guide today. It takes great strength to study Hebrew. It is very difficult. In the last 25 years, 2 million people whose mother language was Russian, French, German, Italian, Indian, Arabic, 50 other languages have learned to speak Hebrew. Some want to learn because they are Christians and want to be able to read the Bible in the original language. But for most, Hebrew is the common denominator. They come here 5 days a week because they want to become part of a country.
Now, would you read the caption under the...
For the third generation Israeli, the language he struggles with is not his language, but the language of others, and how that language is used in distant parts of the world to affect his future. Words and their meaning probably affect this generation more than their contemporaries in any other city in the world.
Existence. Do you know the word? Could you say that you belong here and that this is your country and your city and that you have every right to it?
I didn't just come here because I was born here, so maybe it's my right. I'm not sure.
Because you were born here, does that make it your right or not? You don't know, you're not sure. לתרגם לעברית, existence?
Support Israel to live.
Israel's right to be.
Again, we must change the letter Y to R-E-S. Did you understood? What's this? These. What's this?
The languages taught here are the same. The Arab children learn Hebrew as their second language, the Israelis Arabic, and both English. Each teaches its own history, traditions, and culture.
Y to I-E-S.
The problem of running Jerusalem is similar to those of any city of comparable size anywhere in the world. But the exceptions are dramatic. Since 1967, walls no longer physically separate Arab from Jew. Jerusalem is no longer a divided city. Economically and governmentally, the city is united. We have differences, but our conversations are very frank. They have taught that change in the name of progress does not always improve the quality of life. We have taught that government has the responsibility to provide services for all the people, not just those who can afford it. They have affected our food, our slang, our sense of humor. We have learned from the respect for the simple fundamental qualities of the land. We have affected their sense of social justice, an expectation for a better economic future. It is difficult to say whether the large political differences will be solved in our lifetime. But at least the dialogue has begun.
Some of you were with us last night. We were walking back and we experienced Ramadan, the people waiting for the cannon to go off to eat their food. And a few minutes later, we saw the whole of the Western Wall filled with people at prayer for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. The important thing about the situation is the fact that you are no longer a majority. You are now a minority. If you haven't ever felt it in your life, you should feel it now. You're in a minority as far as Americans. You're in a minority as far as Westerners. You're in a minority as far as Christians, and a Jewish and a Muslim majority.
Going in the city through St. Stephen's Gate, it's also called the Lion's Gate, because carved stone lions on the yards here. Now follow me into St. Anne's. Excuse me. On Sunday, you would have to walk up this hill. And this church was the Crusader church of the 12th century. Now, as I mentioned, in the Six-Day War, the Israeli army, one of the ways they entered the city was through the St. Stephen's Gate. And there was a mortar attack on the gate, and unfortunately, this church was hit a number of times. It was the only shrine in the old city that was touched at all, because the Israelis were very careful to try and avoid touching any of the shrines. But the repairs have been carried out. It's barely noticeable.
When we captured the old city, I came here to the Jewish quarter with my father. The scrolls were torn up, the Torahs desecrated. Those synagogues which were not destroyed became houses. Here and there you could see a Hebrew inscription. My father cried. The tragedy of the destruction of the Jewish quarter permitted for the first time excavation below the foundations of the destroyed structures. It is in this dig that we began to understand more clearly how people lived during the time of the Second Temple.
לא, אל תבייש, תגיד את האמת. פעם ראשונה שאפשר להגיד בהיסטוריה, אל תצד אותי, צריך לשאול את הפרופסור בדיוק, שפה בירושלים מצאנו קירות בגובה של קרוב ל3 מטר, עם טיח, כפי שאתה רואה פה.
What is it, a Rhodian house or a palace?
A Rhodian house or villa, I don't want to say exactly. As you can see for yourself, we have the frescoes, maybe 2 floors here. Because we have at a very high level, it's about 3 meters from the bottom up to here. This is going to be for Yeshivat HaKotel. On the bottom of the Yeshivat HaKotel, we're going to have a small museum here.
After you finish the excavations, they are going to put the floor over. Who is going to keep it?
This will be, remember, the Jewish municipality and the Hebrew University. And the Antiquities Department, naturally.
How long will it take you to work to dig underneath the Rhodian stratum?
First of all, we can't find anything underneath because we already have bedrock here. This is bedrock. Second day, we plan to excavate inside this whole area towards the east to connect with the other areas there.
When are you going to finish?
When we're going to finish, this is a very difficult problem because...
If you're going to continue the dig, what is going to happen to the Crusader Church, which is nearby?
The Crusader Church, no. The Crusader Church is on top, actually. We're going to...
My church. My church.
Your Crusader Church is located on the other side of the street.
The love Europe had for Palestine fascinates me. The art, the architecture, the feudal institutions, the whole fabric of European Western culture. The relationship of Franks, Crusaders, and Muslims. Under the Crusaders, the Holy Land became the first European colony. They came here to Palestine with the aim of redeeming the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Crusaders built churches because the Crusades were a religious enterprise. They built castles because they had to defend themselves. The Crusaders were always a minority in the country, always threatened. They tried to reinforce their strength by building, to be able to hold the kingdom with less people. They replaced men with stone.
One thing interesting about the Crusaders, it might be a good word in the United States, but here it's a very bad word, because they not only killed Jews, they rounded all the Jews up and put them in the synagogue and burned them. They not only killed Muslims, because they were the pagans, they weren't even as good as the Jews for the Crusaders, and the Eastern Christians were massacred.
The Crusaders contributed to a very important period in the history and development of architecture. It was the transition from Romanesque to Gothic. The castles in Europe were inferior to those in Palestine and Byzantium. It was here that they were forced to develop the fine art of military architecture. This is called by the Muslims Salahiyah. It originally was a Byzantine church, rebuilt by the Crusaders and captured by the Muslims in 1187. It then became a Muslim theological school and then abandoned. It was kept as a stable until the middle of the 19th century. The Turkish government then gave it to the French government, and they rededicated the church and gave it to the White Fathers.
The Crusaders left, came the Mamelukes. Mamelukes turned into the Turks. The Turks were taken by Allenby in 1917. all that went on in Jerusalem between 1917 and the pulling out of the British in 48, right on up to the 48 war, and more recently, within your lifetime, my lifetime, is the Israeli taking of the city in 1967, are reminders to us of the scripture, 1,000 years are with the Lord as one day.
The last Jewish revolt was put down by the Romans in 135 AD. And the walls and the streets remained the same since that year. Each time the city was destroyed and rebuilt, the walls and streets were built on top of the previous ones. In Jerusalem, you can't play games. You have to build everything on the shoulder of your father, the shoulder of the previous civilization. You have to go to bedrock to see who shaped the city. You have to go back 2,000 years, 15 meters down.
At this point, where our Lord could not go on, but Simon of Cyrene had to carry the cross behind him. From that angle is the place that you usually see pictures of the Stations of the Cross. Now, we don't know this woman's name. Her name was not Veronica. But we get the word Veronica from the two words vera, meaning true, and icon, meaning image. Remember, our Lord left the imprint of his face on the veil. And therefore, from this, we get the word Veronica. And this is where we commemorate this event. So just follow on up.
Between 1948 and 1967, when the city was divided, there were neighborhoods and streets that formed the border between the two hostile communities. Everything was neglected. Roads, water, schools, playgrounds, electricity. Today, citywide, there is more building in Jerusalem in 1 year than had previously been built in a generation. New hospitals, concert halls, 600 classrooms, 2 university campuses. Jerusalem is building 5,000 apartments a year to house 20,000 people, enough to accommodate 2/3 of the entire population of Jerusalem less than 100 years ago. There are 3,000 more cars in Jerusalem every year, and in many places, the design of the streets have changed very little. But for most Jerusalemites, this has made little difference.
Therefore, if you all take a look over at the Dung Gate, and you see where you are now, you can see what's between here and the Dung Gate. So where are we standing now? At the beginning of David City, that's right. Actually, we're probably standing on a bunch of fill here. It's probably a rock way down there beneath us. Get the idea that you're crossing from where you live on the upper city of Jerusalem over to David City, and the object of the game today is to move from the temple area, which you know already from above, around the western wall, and to go from there down David City. And as we do, we're going to have to refer to many different portions of Scripture, different portions of historical records, to try to reconstruct what was this little ridge, which is really, even today, insignificant in that it was outside the city. What role, what important role did it play in the life of Jerusalem?
There's a spring here called the Spring of Gihon. This is the reason Jerusalem is here. In ancient days, some tribe passing through here found the spring, and they decided to build a settlement. Later, Abraham returned to Mount Moriah, which was just north of the city, and there he was about to offer up Isaac, his son, in sacrifice, as God had ordered him to do. You all know that story.
What we are concerned about is what happened in history from the time that David took the city from the Jebusites, on through the Israelite period, on through the kingdom of Judah, when the kingdom of Israel to the north was destroyed, on through the period of Ezra, Nehemiah, these names you know so well. Okay, let's go across this area over and take a look down the Kidron.
The second mention of Jerusalem was at the time of David. David was having difficulty keeping his 12 tribes together. So he decided he had to capture the central capital. He couldn't use the city of one of the 12 tribes because then that tribe would say, we are the dominant tribe because our city is capital. So he had to capture a neutral city. He captured the city of Jerusalem from the Jebusites and made it his capital. It would be his son Solomon who built the temple here on this site. People then began to build out onto the upper hill, which later became known as the upper city.
In the middle of the 19th century, Jerusalem left the walls of the old city and started building towards the hills, to the west. This became a different city, an entirely different way of building a city, because it was the linear road system, like all modern cities. Jerusalem is like the frame of a kaleidoscope, always changing, but holding changes together. So many civilizations have passed through the city. So many influences. And you have the residue here of all those civilizations. This part of the city was built for people, not sultans or kings or conquerors. And the way people dress in the city is more or less how they dressed before they came here. They don't feel compelled to change their identity. One of the dangers of modern technology is that it will change the face of Jerusalem. It is hard to say whether it will be better, but it will be new. Most people know of Jerusalem only through what they have read in storybooks. If they were to drive through the city today, they might ask, what are buildings like this doing in Jerusalem? They may not be aware that the city is the capital of a country of 3 million people, 330,000 of whom live here, get up every morning and go to work, and face the same problems that city people do everywhere.
That's the legal situation. Right, exactly. So therefore, when you say you are amending a plan, you have to show what are you amending.
Now, this whole operation is a desperate operation.
The fact that millions of people in the world feel that they are also spiritual citizens of Jerusalem is a great responsibility.
The Jerusalem comprehensively in the form of policies.
There will be no action on the outline scheme until the concepts will be clear.
Our job is not just to serve people who own land in Jerusalem and pay taxes. Jerusalem's constituency is much bigger than that.
In Romema, to hold back.
Give me the area.
Anything on the other side will find the legal definition, no building on that area, deposited.
But what's his name is going to come and tell us about a minor change in a street?
No. No?
Ma!
Who's going to come?
First of all, everything you said now, I agree, I accept. The only thing I want that was changed since last Thursday is that we are modest now.
So here in Jerusalem, you have a very deep problem of how to rule. And of course, everybody who is outside Jerusalem feels they know exactly the solution, because it's very easy to tell someone how to do something if you're sitting from a distance. But if you're sitting here and there are real human needs, real religious needs, real spiritual needs, it's very difficult to have solutions.
From the point of view of the city, it was bad. Why? Because the concept of 59 was the concept of divided city. and the destruction of the center. So the concept of
David, Herod, and Solomon didn't allow the city to develop in an unorganized way.
Menachem and all this, right? So now, on that, since 1967, you built according to the old concept because the city was divided, right? Now you come when...
The Romans also had a good concept of the city. The British had 3 master plans. The Turks had none.
Of the 59 plan, this is what you said. I want a new plan. Can you submit a new plan or not? If not, give me the essentials and leave me alone, work 2 more years, and I want a new plan.
The small hill up here behind me, Solomon built a small fortress to protect the temple. When the temple was destroyed, so was the fortress. Then the second temple was built, and so was a second fortress. Herod the Great rebuilt the second temple and made it the tremendous structure that it was. It was a combination of palace and fortress. And he named it after his close friend Mark Antony. He called it the Antonia. This is where Pilate had taken up residence on Good Friday. Beneath the street level, some feet down, is the remains of the street that went through the Antonia itself. It's still in place there.
You remember the fire a few years back in Al-Aqsa? At that time, the temple was, as it is today, under Muslim control. And so the fire, actually, that the whole world blamed Israel for, was not anything to do with Israel control of the temple area, because it was all Muslim control, and anyway, it was a Christian from Australia who was mixed up.
One of the most beautiful sermons in Islamic history was delivered from here. When I saw the fire that day, I wept. What happened was a terrible thing for the people of the city. The mosque was built in 640 AD over the ruins of a Byzantine church, which in turn was built over the ruins of the Second Temple. For Muslims, this is the place where Muhammad ascended into heaven. Only when Muhammad started quarreling with the Jewish tribes of Arabia and failed to change their religion did he change the direction of prayer to Mecca. In 1967, there were 12,000 dwellings in East Jerusalem. 59% of them had no water or electricity. Those who did dug their own cisterns. In 7 years, 1,800 dwellings have been built. By the end of this year, all homes in East Jerusalem will have power and water. On the east side of the city alone, within the next 5 years, there will have to be built 50 kilometers of sewers and roads. 8 schools and 5 parks.
Today, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre belongs to the Catholics, which are always referred to as the Latins here. It belongs to the Latins, the Greek Orthodox, and the Armenian Orthodox. Stone by stone, actually, they're going over the church. Anything that can be repaired is repaired. If it's too far gone, it's removed, and an exact duplicate of the 12th century one is made and put in its place. When it's finished, it'll be as it was in the 12th century. As I said, the church is owned by the 3 different branches of the church, the Latins, Greeks, and Armenians. And the interesting thing is that the keys of the front door, since the end of the 12th century, have been owned by 2 Muslim families. And they have to be paid every day to open the church. Sounds a bit strange, but over the centuries, it has been a neutral ownership, and therefore it has protected the rights of all 3 churches.
right there on the top of the mount. Muslims hold that in almost greater reverence than we do as Christians. And we must respect their feelings about it. For Christians, we don't, do we have to say anything, how important the whole area is. For Jews, it's the center of the world. This is the wall, the temple, the place where God spoke through the prophets, where King David ruled, where so much of what is important in Jewish spiritual life, as well as physical, historical life, took place.
We found it one morning at 10 a.m. in the late summer. This is the exact position where it was found. It is like bridging two millenniums. We could identify with something that was more than just stone or an architectural detail. We could read in our own language, and you could remember the passage in the holy books. It was the parapet cornerstone from the top of the tower which stood at the southeast corner of the temple enclosure. It has an inscription, Beit HaTikiyah, something else. We haven't the other end of it. This is translated as the place of the blowing of the trumpet. It is presumed that it was dislodged by the Romans. This stone and no more of the wall is lying here on the pavement. Being a stone with an inscription, possibly the Romans dislodged this as a special thing when they were determined to destroy all of the traces of the Jews. On a hill in West Jerusalem, there is a museum memorial called Yad Vashem. It commemorates a tragedy incomprehensible to modern man. A floor of 6 million mosaics representing the extermination of 6 million human beings. Remembered in Jerusalem as they remember Jerusalem in their prayers.
deinem